Hello, welcome. My name's Stacey Wordsworth. I'm president of the Rural Press Club of Queensland, and look, a very big welcome to all of you today. It's wonderful to have you, and for those of you who have just tuned in for the first time to one of our webinar events, as our name suggests, we are the Rural Press Club of Queensland. We're a press club, and we aim to bring you leading speakers in agriculture and have them address media and the agri-business community, typically at our monthly luncheon events. However, with COVID-19 came some drastic changes to the way that we do business, and we've been operating across our online platform since around April this year. So while we're missing everyone in person, our online events have drawn thousands of people from across the globe since we began RPC Online, and it's fantastic to see people registered today from right across Queensland and indeed Australia to hear our speaker, Leader of the Opposition, Deb Frecklington. In the lead up to what is a critical time for Queensland politics, with just under 6 weeks to the state election. More on Ms Frecklington shortly. However, I do want to begin by offering our warmest thanks to our sponsors, McCullough Robertson Lawyers, CBRE and Sun Super. I've said this many times before, when these organisations signed on to be sponsors in 2020 with us, webinars were not what they were expecting. COVID happened, here we are, and our sponsors have thrown their full support behind us and Queensland agriculture, and we can't thank them enough. Just a couple of very small housekeeping items. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the address today, and we absolutely encourage you to do this. It's not that often that you have this sort of access to a political leader in the lead up to an election. To submit your questions, you just need to scroll down to the bottom of your screen where there's a Q&A button. Hit that and you're able to type your question in there. If you could leave us your name and where you're from as well, and then pop in your question, I'll go through and try to get to as many of those as I possibly can in the time that we have assigned today. So as I said, the Queensland election is fast approaching, and it's already shaping up to be one that's unlike many others in a number of respects. And I'm sure I don't need to point out the most obvious one of those, or the most significant, being COVID-19. Of course, there have been many sizable national issues the pandemic has brought, which have had state level consequences, for example, border closures, energy plans, and the trade relationship with China. It could also be argued one of the flow-on effects of the pandemic has been we've probably heard much less about the other state-based issues that are critical to the way agriculture does business in Queensland over the course of the last few months, things like water policy and reef regulation and road networks, just to name a few. Well, today you will hear firsthand the position of the LNP on how it proposes to support Queensland primary production should it be successful on Saturday, the 31st of October, from Leader of the Opposition, Shadow Minister for Trade and Member for Nanango, Deb Frecklington. Before I go further, I do want to point out that the Premier of Queensland, Anastasia Palaszczuk, was also invited to participate in our RPC Online event. However, we've been unable to secure a date with her. But back to today, Deb Frecklington, and here's a bit of background on Deb. Deb Frecklington graduated from the University of Southern Queensland with a business degree and holds a Bachelor of Laws from the Queensland University of Technology, I should say. She practiced at Kelly and Frecklington Solicitors before, in 2012, moving into politics as member for Nanango, a position she was re-elected to in 2015, when she also became Shadow Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. Then in May 2016, Ms Frecklington was elected to the position of Deputy Leader of the LNP and became Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, State Development and Trade and Investment, before being re-elected for a third term in November 2017 and taking over leadership of the LNP the following month. She lives in Kingaroy with her husband Jason and 3 daughters. So with that, I welcome Deb Frecklington to the Rural Press Club of Queensland as our September speaker. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Stacey. And I, for one, am extremely excited to be here this afternoon. Of course, I would have much preferred to be in a room with you all, but I will say this, I've been so looking forward to being invited to be a guest speaker at the Rural Press Club. It's an event that we all covet and we all look forward to. So when the invitation came to me, I was really, really excited. So today is very important, and it does give me an opportunity to outline some of the plans and policies that we've got in place in the lead up to the next state election. So for those of you who don't know, there are just 40 days to go before the next state election, and everyone thinks that their next election is the most important, and they are right. But this election, as Stacey has just so rightfully pointed out, really will be a turning point for Queensland, because the next state government is going to be in power for 4 years, not 3. And it is those 4 years that will be just critical for the future of Queensland. Now, I know all of you on the call will know this, but we are now in our first recession that many Queenslanders will have ever known. In fact, it's a worse recession than since the 1930s. We've also got around 200,000 Queenslanders who are unemployed. But how deep this recession goes and just how well we'll recover from it will be decided at this next state election. And ladies and gentlemen, that is what this next state election is all about. And that is why everyone must make the right decision on the 31st of October or in the lead up to that vote. Now, the LNP has an ambitious plan to stimulate the economy, and that means creating a decade of secure jobs just to drag Queensland out of recession. Now, it is the LNP that has a vision for the future, and the vision is to make Queensland an economic powerhouse once again. And I love to say, it is the best place to get a job, the best place to get ahead, and the best place to raise a family. Now, the LNP's plan is based on 4 foundations. 1, investing for growth. 2, unleashing Queensland's industry. 3, supercharging the regions. And 4, securing our children's future. Now, I know that the LNP's plan will get Queensland working again, but importantly, it strengthens every corner of Queensland, not just Brisbane, not just the southeast, but every corner of Queensland. And that is something that is very important to me. Now, I've also said from my first press conference on the 12th of December as the leader of the Liberal National Party, we will end the divide between Brisbane and the regions. We will give regional Queensland the respect it has been denied for the last 5 years. Now, we all know Labor's record. In my mind, the Palaszczuk Labor government is the worst government that rural and regional Queensland has ever seen. There has never been a government more hostile to agriculture. So as soon as Labor won a majority in 2017, their priorities were to impose damaging restrictions on farming. Restrictions that were based on prejudice and ignorance, and definitely not science. Now, the restrictions that were introduced despite the devastating drought in most of Queensland at the time. Labor then closed our agricultural colleges and reduced bushfire prevention measures. And Labor flagged a $50 million cut to fodder freight subsidies if it wins the next election. Now, in stark contrast, the plan that the LNP has in place could not be greater. And I want to say this, there is no token regional members in my shadow cabinet. We get the regions. Now, many of you know that I'm a loud, proud supporter of my regional background, but I represent a rural electorate and my deputy Tim Mander represents a Brisbane electorate. And that is how the LNP works. Now, we will and we do unite rural and urban Queensland. So a future LNP government would treat regional Queenslanders with the respect that they deserve. We'll listen to rural Queenslanders and we'll work in partnership with them. Now, together, it is our plan to bring jobs and opportunity and hope to the bush. Now, there is no bigger, bolder, grander plan for Queensland than the new Bradfield scheme. Now, I'm always more than excited to talk about the new Bradfield scheme, but make no mistake, the LNP's new Bradfield scheme will be the new economic driver for all of Queensland. It is a true nation-building project. In fact, the largest dam ever to be built in Australia. It'll have hydroelectricity with enough power for 800,000 homes. Again, the largest hydroelectric scheme ever built in Queensland. So we know it'll improve water security for the bush. But it will also create a new food bowl in the heart of our state that will be bigger than Tasmania. And very proudly, it will be 100% built and owned by Queenslanders. Now, the public response to our plan has been overwhelmingly positive, and that is because Queenslanders know a good thing when they see it. And they also like it because they know Queensland's potential right now is being wasted. Now, Queenslanders also know that their future depends on the decisions that governments make today. So it is the role of government to deliver infrastructure by investing for growth. And a government that I lead will deliver the water infrastructure that Queensland needs. Now, I'm always excited to be talking about water and water schemes, but I'm also very pleased to be a leader of the Liberal National Party that will build dams. And the LNP's plan for water infrastructure is more than just the new Bradfield scheme. Our plan, of course, also includes Urana Dam near Mackay, Nalinga Dam on the Atherton Tablelands, Rookwood Weir in central Queensland, and of course, Emu Swamp Dam on the Granite Belt. We're also talking about raising the Burdekin Falls Dam in North Queensland and fixing Paradise Dam in the Wide Bay. But ladies and gentlemen, we will also create a new state government cooperation, the Queensland Dam Company. And the Queensland Dam Company will be set up to progress these projects. And that agency will be based in Townsville, not Brisbane, because I don't want to remote control the regions. It's important that we supercharge the regions. And by that, we set up the Queensland Dam Company to get to work on those dam projects. It means putting highly paid and secure public service jobs into those regional communities. But the LNP won't just supply more water for the bush, we'll make it cheaper too. And I was really pleased to be in the Burdekin electorate to announce a future LNP government will implement the recommendations of the Queensland Competition Authority on adopting a regulated asset-based approach for financing asset renewals. Quite simply, for those who don't understand, that means Sunwater will slash the price of water for 5,000 regional consumers or customers by almost 20%. So if an LNP government is elected in this next election, so in 40 days' time, that Sunwater price effect and price cut will come into effect from the 1st of July next year. Now, we also know what the Labor Party have in store for those Sunwater customers. If they are elected, the price hikes are set in at 48%. That's what's in the pipeline. So only the LNP have a plan in relation to the reduction of water prices for those Sunwater growers. Now, we also always know, and I'm really pleased to constantly say, we know that water means jobs. It means more productivity and more regional jobs. But the LNP's economic plan for rural and regional Queensland, whilst it might be big, bold and ambitious, and to implement our plan as soon as possible, I've already announced an LNP government will establish an economic recovery agency. Now, the Economic Recovery Agency will be headed up by a brand new Coordinator General. We'll kickstart major stimulus projects across the state. Now, whether those projects include the new Bradfield scheme, the Queensland Dam Company, and the lowering of water charges. So what coronavirus has done here in Queensland is extremely damaging. It has caused more economic damage than any fire, flood, or cyclone that we've ever seen. The economic recovery from a natural disaster would have started within days, if not on the day. But the Palaszczuk government still has no plan and had no budget for 8 months after the coronavirus outbreak began. So the LNP's Economic Recovery Agency is there to repair the economic damage inflicted by coronavirus. But it'll also repair the economic damage that was caused for the past 5 years under the current Palaszczuk government. Now, the Economic Recovery Agency will be Queensland's Department of Grunt for all of our economic recovery. And now, whilst we may wish to talk about the stimulus projects to make sure that we're getting jobs underway, an LNP government will also start straight away by fixing the current Labor government's anti-farmer legislation. So we'll deliver new landscape management laws that respect our farmers and respect the environment. The LNP will not keep legislation that makes it a crime for farmers to feed mulga to starving cattle. Now, the government I lead will develop a new framework for veg management that provides certainty of process, acknowledges and protects Queensland's diverse landscapes, restores sensible property rights for landholders, supports jobs and food security, and considers the impact of drought, bushfires and floods. Now, the consultation process for this will begin within the first month of an LNP government. The process will finally give our landholders, our farmers, a fair hearing, and it will deliver fairer laws. Now, the LNP will also work to reform Labor's unworkable reef regulations. The Palaszczuk Labor government has piled red tape onto our farmers and handed unprecedented powers to unaccountable bureaucrats in Brisbane. Now, we know the regulations do not protect the reef. The only thing they are doing are protecting Anastasia Palaszczuk's green preferences. So the LNP will develop new environmental standards that will protect jobs and protect the reef. Our regulations will be based on best practice and sound agronomic science. We will ensure that the reef and our farmers both have a future in Queensland. Now, agriculture, as you may have gathered, will never be an afterthought for either me or the LNP. Support for farming will always be at the forefront of our policy making. Now, for instance, we will get rid of the pointless regulations that force resource companies to destroy dams or roads or fences once resource projects come to an end. So if those landholders want to keep infrastructure like those roads, fences, dams, or even irrigation systems in place, naturally they should be allowed to. Right now there's about $1 billion worth of infrastructure in rural Queensland that could be repurposed to support those agricultural areas. So I will take every opportunity to back the farming sector and farming. But ladies and gentlemen, an LNP government will not only protect jobs, but will also set about to protect lives and property. Now, Queensland is one state that faces severe bushfire threat every year. But the Palaszczuk Labor government's defence against bushfires has been getting weaker and weaker and certainly not stronger. Now, we know that time and time again, the Labor government have failed to meet its targets for their hazard reduction measures. They're literally playing with fire. So an LNP government won't gamble with the safety of Queenslanders. We will implement the 10-point plan to reduce bushfire menace across the state. Now, our measures will include, very importantly, restoring local control of our rural fire brigades. Also, setting a 98% completion target for hazard reduction activities will give our landholders automatic approval to burn if permits are not issued within 15 days. And we'll also have a one-stop shop for all bushfire mitigation inquiries and permits. We'll also ensure that the Rural Fire Service is properly funded after seeing and enduring a $6.4 million cut over the last 2 years. And unlike Labor, our funding for rural fires rural fire risk will be clearly detailed in a full state budget, one that we're still waiting from the Labor government. Now, whilst we know that Labor cancelled their budget, in fact, they are the only state government in the nation not to deliver a full budget this year. But I have already instructed that Shadow Treasurer Tim Mander will deliver a full state budget within the first 100 days of an LNP government. Now, businesses and Queenslanders have had to endure 9 new taxes from the Labor government in the last 2 years. Now, we know that those 9 new taxes have ripped nearly $4 billion out of the Queensland economy in the last 2 years alone. So I can give you this guarantee: there will be no new taxes under an LNP government, because you can't tax your way to growth. Now, Queensland's past economic success, quite frankly, was built on being a low taxing state. A state where anyone who wanted to get work or was ready to work could get a job and get ahead. Well, that's what I want to see for Queensland. That's my vision for Queensland once again. So there'll be no new taxes under an LNP government that I lead. Instead, there will be action to stop government waste. Now, when we talk about government waste, there are so many examples. But there is the $527 million blowout on Labor's IT projects. So I give you this commitment: the LNP will spend responsibly and run a balanced budget over the economic cycle. We will secure Queensland's financial position by growing our economy. Now, our plan will not just create a stronger economy and build Queensland back into the economic powerhouse that it should be. It will also create those secure jobs, but it will also create a more secure financial future for our kids and for Queensland. Now, my plan will ensure that we can invest in the high quality education and health services that all Queenslanders deserve. A stronger economy will allow us to slash waiting times for surgery and raise our education standards in our schools. It will also allow us to support once again the rural maternity services that have been slashed under successive Labor governments. We will grow maternity services in the bush, we won't cut them. So unlike Labor, I know how hard it is to access medical services in the bush. We must look after people when it comes to our health system here in Queensland. Now, also, unlike Labor, I know how hard it is for rural parents to give their kids a great education. So whether they're being taught at home or at boarding school, their education won't be neglected by an LNP government. It is because of our kids that I am so passionate about our plan for Queensland, because I want my kids to be able to grow up and live in the bush and work in the bush if they so choose to. But ladies and gentlemen, we must grow a strong economy if we're going to improve the health and the education of our kids' future, because we must have that at our forefront. We've got to work towards securing Queensland's children's future. So Stacey, thank you so much for your patience. We know that the LNP's plan is big and it's bold, and I don't have enough time here today to talk about every aspect. We know we are setting big goals for ourselves and for Queensland, but I know I've got the people and the policies in place to turn this state around. I also know that Queensland is bursting with potential. I know that it can have a big, bold, bright future. And I, for one, am very excited to be working around the clock until October 31st, because again, we cannot afford to make the wrong choice for Queensland at this election. I know that only the LNP have got that plan to drag Queensland out of recession, a plan that will secure not just for this year, not just for next year or for next election, but decades of secure jobs. Because our plan is all about investing for growth, unleashing Queensland's industry, supercharging the regions, and securing our children's future. My vision is we must get Queensland working again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we do have some questions starting to stream through now. Remember, if you have a question, you just need to hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, type your question in. Please just let me know your name and where you're from. But we'll move to our first question. I was going to say this morning, but it's this afternoon. It's from Kerry Latter. And Kerry says, while water is critical and the LNP's pledge on water pricing is appreciated, what goes hand in hand with it for irrigators is cost-effective electricity prices to pump the water. How will the LNP support the growth in irrigated agriculture via cost-effective and specialised tariffs for irrigators?
Okay, thank you very much, Kerry. And it would be remiss of either myself or anyone listening not to ask about electricity. So there's a couple of things. The first thing I'd like to say is I know that many of the people on this forum today know about the fact that the LNP has already announced that we will introduce retail competition into the electricity market for regional Queensland. I, like anyone living outside of the southeast, only has the option for ergon, and we're going to broaden that up because we know that that will save around $300 for a user every year for households. And in relation to ag energy, I've been really pleased to have all of the relevant shadow ministers meet with the industry groups, including cane growers, to make sure that we're working out a strategy to reduce the electricity prices, not just water prices. And I am very much looking forward to this election campaign for when we will be making that announcement.
Okay, our next question comes from Jonathan Pavetto from AEC Group in Townsville, and he asks, how will the Economic Recovery Agency manage conflicts between the environment and the economy? Will it have the authority to override flora and fauna or reef protections in favour of job-generating projects?
Well, first and foremost, the most important thing we need to do is we need to start kick-starting the Queensland economy. So we cannot have the state government working against jobs in this great state. So that is why the new Coordinator General will have the power within the first 100 days to give me a list of the projects, why they are stalled and why they are taking so long to get off the government's desk and get the tick. Of course, we need to make sure that we are doing everything right by the environment and also by the financial regulations that are required for many of these projects. We cannot make shortcuts, but we must get rid of the red and green tape that are holding up these projects and actually look at it very sensibly. Jonathan, I have already announced that we will be reviewing, of course, those reef rigs and the veg management straight away, but we do need to make sure that these projects get going. We cannot afford to have the hundreds of projects sitting on the ministers' desks like we have right now, and yet we've got people in regional Queensland that are screaming out for jobs. We've got road projects, for example, that can't even get going because of government red tape and green tape. So you certainly have my commitment on this. We will be extremely serious about it. I have already announced that we will be defunding the Environmental Defenders Office because it is very important that we do not have the state government working against itself.
Just sticking with I guess, environmental theme, we've got a question that's come through. Unfortunately, there's no name attached to this one, but the question is, what modelling has been done to assess impacts of climate change on the proposed Bradfield scheme?
Yeah, sure. I'm more than happy to talk about the new Bradfield scheme and how exciting it is for the environment. And I've listed a couple of those, a couple of the benefits for the environment. 800,000 homes for hydroelectricity. I mean, that is huge future-proofing of the electricity market in North Queensland. I mean, imagine the benefits of that. I mean, we know that it was the Bjelke-Petersen government that set up the hydro, for example, in Wivenhoe, now still runs, government-owned corporation. That is just one. We're working we've got the first, and I announced that up in Townsville, we've got the engineering concept designs in relation to the size of the dam. So we can start looking at the impacts and how that that it will work. Because it is important that we do look after the environment. And that is exactly why this is a project that will benefit both the environment and the agricultural sector. But most really excitingly, it's nation building. It will create the next generation of jobs, whether it's in environmental scientists, whether it's in dam building engineers, road engineers, or all of those incredible little businesses that will be able to set up around that area and to create more jobs for the future.
Another very, I think, popular topic in ag circles is digital and the ability of digital farming and agriculture and technology to unlock potential. We've had a couple of questions come through on this topic this afternoon as well. The first is from Dr. Pamela Greet from Future Ag Queensland, and she asks, would your supercharge for the regions possibly include a nation-leading ag tech college that offers a bridge into this growing field where we can potentially play a leading role?
Well, look, I do, and thank you for the question, because I think it's really, really quite exciting. When you have a government that will be so focused, quite frankly, on all of Queensland, but that does have a serious and understands the benefit of regional Queensland, we do need to support the next generation in their education and learning. I've already been meeting with the universities. I've met with the university, all of the VCs at a combined meeting in relation to the future and where I see those future technologies being able to be benefited through the education process. We know the Palaszczuk government have shut down the ag colleges, and we also have already announced over 12 months ago that we'd work with industry around making sure that we are growing that sector, which is more in the training space rather than the university space. Look, the future of ag is really exciting in Queensland. Now, I know that the technology leaders that we have in the agricultural industry are usually I was about to say world class, and I think they are, because they are usually first adopters and early adopters of new technology. And that could be said from years ago, many years ago, when we're the first and early adapters into zero till and GPS tracking, etc. And now the way robotics is working. And that's why we need to make sure that we're working with our lead educators. Will we have a dedicated college in relation to that? That is not something we have committed, but we certainly know the advantage in the engineering space, but also in that environmental science space as well.
Yeah, I think perhaps you've possibly touched on this, but I wanted to follow up with another tech-based question from John Reeve, who says, building dams is great, but the future in agri and other sectors is digital. What's the digital plan from the LNP?
What's the digital plan? Well, it depends in which area it is. One thing I'd say is you certainly need good communication, which is why we'll continue to work with the federal government in relation to that. I mean, in relation to the new digital economy, I mean, it is important that it isn't just siloed off by itself. It's got to go across all, particularly when I'm talking to the Rural Press Club, it's got to go across all of our industries. And that's exactly why you might like to be a bit more specific with your question, and I'm more than happy to expand upon it.
Okay, if anyone does have a question, we are going to have time to take some more, so pop down to that Q&A box on the bottom of your screen and type in your question. We'll try and get to you in the time that we have left. Mark Phelps, who everyone, nearly everyone, I would think would be familiar with, also a committee member of the Rural Press Club of Queensland. Hi, Mark. Has asked, will the LNP preference the Greens in West End to ensure the defeat of Jackie Trad, or has her removal from Cabinet already nullified the negative impact she had on Queensland agriculture?
Hello, Mark. Look, we've been very clear in relation to that. There is no greater enemy to the Queensland economy and agriculture than Jackie Trad. So the LNP will do whatever we can to ensure that Jackie Trad is not returned to Parliament. Make no mistake, Jackie Trad is still the most powerful person in Queensland politics. The Premier of Queensland has not ruled out Jackie Trad returning to Cabinet. Jackie Trad holds the numbers in the left, and we all know that once if the Palaszczuk government gets re-elected, Jackie Trad will certainly have her hands back on the cabinet table, and she will not stop until she completely shuts down not only the agricultural industry but the resources industry as well, and that is very important to the future of the Queensland economy as well.
Just shifting from pure agriculture, but certainly still staying with Queensland business, and Steve Lads has sent in a message. He says, "Hi Deb, I own and manage a small mid-tier construction and consulting company here in Queensland. What plan does the LNP have to create a pathway for businesses like ours to grow?"
Yeah, great. Thank you, Steve. And look, one of the really important pillars of what we are talking about kickstarting the Queensland economy is making sure that we are putting a real focus in on infrastructure investment. Whilst I've focused quite heavily today, of course, on the water infrastructure, but we also have a very serious roads infrastructure as well, and more will be said about that. But in relation to construction, particularly mid-tier companies, we are very excited to say that there's a couple of things. We're going to decouple the contracts so we can ensure that Queensland companies are going to get an option so we'll break down effectively those major infrastructure construction contracts to make sure that it isn't just going to the big tier one guys whose money ends up overseas anyway, that we will enable those mid-tiers and smaller tiers to be able to get a bite of the works. We've also announced that, a bit like the Ag Energy Ministerial Council, we'll set up a Ministerial Council for bidding costs. So we are listening directly and hearing directly from industry, particularly in the construction space, to how those contracts, so for the bidding, and also how they will be tendered for.
Question has now come through from Amelia Shaw at Grain Growers, and she would like to know, will the LNP commit to removing stamp duty on agricultural insurance products?
Thank you, Amelia, and I know that is something that you and many of the ag organisations that I've been talking to have certainly been advocating for quite some time. We have not made an announcement in relation to that to date, and I will leave it there. But what I will say is we have said no new or increased taxes, so it's certainly under us will not be going up. And we do know, and we've definitely heard that is a major concern of yours.
If we just go back to the, I guess, the opening of your address, you said that you would work very hard to bridge the divide between Brisbane and the rest of Queensland. That to me, it's a cultural thing. It's a thing that takes time. I did have a question as to what that means in practical terms, what that looks like. And a similar question has actually come through from Bryson Head in Chinchilla, and he says, what plan does the LNP have to counter misinformation in the ag industry that contributes to metro-based voters supporting policy that's detrimental to the ag sector?
Yeah, look, thanks, Stacey, and thanks, Brad. I think it was, apologies, I might have got that name wrong. Bryson. Sorry, Bryson, Stacey, thank you. Look, in my mind, it is all about, you're absolutely right about the cultural change, but it is, so basically with me, you will have a regional premier of Queensland. But I have, from the day I became the leader of the Liberal National Party here in Queensland, I've worked extremely hard to make sure that regional Queensland has the same focus as the South East does. Now, we have a very strong regional shadow cabinet. All of the policies, plans and agendas that we've put in place have worked extremely hard to make sure that the people, no matter where you live in Queensland, that you can have, as best as possible, the same opportunities that our cousins do that live down here in Brisbane. It is a cultural change in the fact that we would not openly advocate for shutting down rural maternity services, for example. We would listen to the ICPA when it comes to issues like borders being stuck at school or drought and impacting on regional education. It is a simple matter of where we come from and where we stand. In my mind, all of Queensland is important, but for too long it's been forgotten. Now, the other thing I would also suggest is that people in the southeast are very open. They want to support regional Queensland. They understand that water means jobs. And that is why I have such a heavy focus on water, because we need water security. We need water security for Brisbane and we need water security for regional Queensland. And so you cannot have water security if you're not going to be open to making policy announcements and being bold in it, like building dams or cutting the price of water across Queensland. So I just think it's more around an agenda, and it's important that we do make sure that we're focusing on all of Queensland rather than just one spot.
You also mentioned that you'd make change to vegetation management laws. You'd look at reef regulations as well. In the same vein of what you're talking about, how do you make those types of changes, I guess, A, palatable to a metropolitan audience, and B, stick, given we've seen changes with every new government that comes in, which adds to that uncertainty?
Yeah, look, without a doubt. And the reason why and I have to give a great deal of credit to the industry groups that are on this hook up today who have worked with us. I want to give a great deal of credit to Tony Perrott, my Shadow Agriculture Minister, and also, very importantly, Dale Last, the Shadow Minister for Natural Resources. What we have been able to do together, so myself, Tony, Dale, Dave Crisafulli, the Shadow Environment Minister, and industry groups, and select other Shadow Ministers, we have consistently said we will be sensible. We have worked with industry. We have consulted quite widely in relation to our landscape management policy that Dale put out through the Country Life several weeks ago, thanks to Mark Phelps as well. But the reason why we have done a considered approach is for exactly the reason, Stacey, that you've talked about. Every change of government swings wildly when it comes to veg management, and we need to stop that. Now, before I entered politics, I did a lot of rural succession work, and I did a lot of work for rural landholders in and around the abhorrent veg management laws that were from the Beatty Bligh years. So it is on the Hansard and it's on record, and I don't need to repeat it all, but I represented someone who was completely cruelled under those legislation. We made sensible legislative changes. However, then Palaszczuk's got back in and it has gone way too far the other way. So that is why we've worked with industry. That is why we've come up with a sensible approach that can be palatable across Queensland, because we've got to stop the flip-flopping with this veg management. But the other thing I want to say to you is that what I think the solution should be is let's just keep a very sensible, pragmatic LNP in government for decades, and then we'll be right.
We are leading up to an election, yes. So not an unexpected comment there. Look, it was inevitable that we'd have some COVID-19 questions come through as well, and it'd be good to get to some of those before we wrap up. We've got 7 minutes or so left of questions. Jim Cudmore says COVID-19 has dealt states and the Commonwealth many economic challenges, but an opportunity exists. How will the LNP take advantage in a policy sense of the renewed engagement by the southeast corner with the broader rural and regional landscape? And I guess is tied into what we've just been talking about as well. Yeah,
look, it really is, but you are right. I know I'm getting short on time, but I just want to say one thing. Pre-COVID, Queensland had the highest unemployment rate in the nation, the highest number of bankruptcies, and the lowest business confidence. Now that has barely moved. So we've got to remember the Queensland economy was in a pretty bad spot before COVID. But COVID, you are right, does give regional Queensland some opportunities. And that is exactly why, in a policy sense, our plans in and around developing regional Queensland, in and around water security for the bush, in and around our regional road programs and the electricity that I'm unable to talk about here today are all ensuring that we're boosting and supercharging our regions, because it is important. But I do want to say this. In a tourism sense, COVID has provided regional Queensland with an incredible opportunity. Now, my electorate of Nanango encompasses the Somerset, South Bend, a little bit of Gympie and a little bit of the North Burnett. Those towns, of which are just a 3-hour drive out of Brisbane, are just booming on weekends and public holidays. So we in regional Queensland do have an opportunity to grab those people that are happy to come out and support regional Queensland and spend their tourism dollars. Instead of flying to Bali, they've now opened up their eyes and have been able to see that places like Richmond has got accommodation booked out now for 2 years in advance. So there are exciting opportunities for rural and regional Queensland off the back of tourism, and then it enables us to be able to show people how environmentally friendly our farmers really are.
Sticking with COVID, another question's come through in relation to the pandemic. This is from Aaron Wakely from AACO, and he says Queensland's cattle king, with almost as many cattle in the state than the rest of Australia combined. What are some of your plans for the pastoral sector specifically over the next 4 years, especially coming out of COVID?
Yeah, well, particularly in relation to the pastoral industry, and thanks for the question. I also think there is and more will be said about it, but again, water and water security to develop. Some of those regions in Queensland, not just flowing from the New Bradfield, but there are other areas that we know in the north in particular that are looking for more water security for their places. And we do know that the fodder crops that can be grown if there is more water in that space. In relation to the cattle industry, there's a couple of other areas, given that I'm shadow trade, I would also like to touch on. I do think it's extremely important that we look to our trading partners and make sure that we are working with them to have a very good trading relationship. We know that there are some difficulties in and around the trading relationship at the moment with China, and I'm working very closely currently with our federal government counterparts in that regard. And I've been having conversations with everyone from Prime Minister Scott Morrison down in relation to that, because it is a very important part of the Queensland economy. But we also need to look at our freight lines, in whether that is our road network in particular. I know that there are many of our regional bush roads and beef roads that certainly need a fair bit of love because they have been neglected. And look, given that in the state of Queensland we've got a $6 billion backlog in road maintenance in regional Queensland, there is a huge amount of work that can be done to make life a fair bit easier for trucking companies.
Time for a few more questions before we wrap up. And staying again with COVID, the state government has an ag worker program that allows some cross-border movement. Is that working, or would you make changes to that policy?
Well, in relation to the border movement, I don't think it's working at all at the moment. I mean, sorry, it's not working efficiently enough. There are too many problems. I'm naturally the leader of the opposition, so when people can't get across the cross-border relations going very well, I mean, a lot of these complaints are coming to us. So we know that the current ability for the ag producers and the aerial pilots, of course the pilots, but is not working very well. So what I have said about the borders is this: we need strong border controls, but it can't be set and forget. I want to make that very clear. Now, the Palaszczuk government are doing everything they can to ensure they are creating a culture of fear into Queensland in and around COVID. But they're making rules okay for AFL stars, Tom Hanks, movie stars, and in the words of the Chief Health Officer, anyone that brings money into the state. Well, I would challenge the Premier that she starts opening her eyes to where the money can flow across our borders for our agricultural producers as well. But we must work on the exemptions, and we must make it easier for our ag producers in particular on those border communities.
It's likely there'll be another National Cabinet meeting during the election campaign, given that we will be in caretaker mode at that point in time. Do you have an expectation that you would be able to also attend that along with Premier Palaszczuk?
Well, look, I don't know the answer to. I'm very fortunate that I have an excellent working relationship with Scott Morrison. He keeps me very well abreast of what's going on, and I'm very lucky that I have a very good working relationship with both Gladys Berejiklian and Stephen Marshall, the two premiers of South Australia and New South Wales. Unfortunately, since the beginning of COVID, I have consistently and repeatedly written to the Premier of Queensland asking for a bipartisan approach to COVID and to have a full government briefing on the effects of COVID on the Queensland economy. Unfortunately, to date, irrespective of writing, I think some maybe 15 times, I'll have to check, I have still not been granted the ability of having a full briefing on the economic impacts on the state of Queensland, which is extremely disappointing. I have been able to get a health briefing from the Chief Health Officer on occasion. So look, in relation to that, Stacey, I'm unsure of where the government, I imagine, going on their past record, irrespective of caretaker, I imagine that the Premier will do everything possible to make sure I'm not at that meeting.
Quickly moving to debt, and John Story asks, is Queensland's impending debt load a poisoned chalice, and can the LNP manage that debt?
Well, look, naturally, the LNP will always be able to manage Labor's debt better than theirs, because what we have to do is we actually have to, we have to stabilise the blowouts. Now, Cameron Dick, the Treasurer of Queensland, stood up the other day and has announced another $4 billion worth of debt, blowing it out to $1.6 billion. But yet only gave us projections for the next 9 months. So we know that the Labor Party have no plan to control or arrest their government debt. We do know that through all of our policies that we have announced, do not believe the rhetoric coming from the Labor government. All of our policies and positions are fully costed and fully funded, and we know that we will always be able to manage the economy much better than the Labor government. Now, people may say it's a poison chalice, and many people say, are you sure you really want the job given how bad Labor's debt is? And let's remember, this has been built up over successive governments that are Labor, and they have no control or no ability to control that government debt. And that's exactly why we must grow the economy. That is exactly why we must have big, bold, ambitious plans to create those decades of secure jobs. Now, the Reserve Bank Governor has said that the only way to pay down debt is to grow the economy. So quite frankly, with the LNP, I take it as a great opportunity to take government, because it means we can secure the finances of Queensland for our kids. It means we have the plan and the vision to grow and supercharge Queensland. And that's the only way we'll get Queensland working again. I mean, we just simply cannot afford another 4 years of these guys who just seem to just continually put it on the credit card.
Okay, so with that, I think we've just about hit our time limit on questions. Thank you to everyone who sent those through. I didn't quite get to every single one of them, but we certainly hit on most of them. So thanks very much for submitting those. And Ms. Frecklington, on behalf of the Rural Press Club of Queensland, our sincerest thanks for joining us today, to you for joining us today, and providing your insights into the LNP's position on ag issues and regional issues. As we now hurtle towards the state election, it will be here before we know it. I don't know if you know this, but it is our usual protocol to present our speakers with either an RPC tie or scarf, but given our current operational model, we'll have to pop one in the post for you if that's all right. So thank you very much for your time today.
No, thank you. And Stacey, thank you so much for organising it. And thank you so much to the Rural Press Club for giving me the absolute honour of being able to address you today. It's been really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, before we go, just a couple of things that I would like to say. The first is, of course, our big thanks to Ashley Nolan and the team at the SAS Group. Ash has been instrumental to getting us up and running online, and continues to be instrumental really every day of the week. So thanks, Ash, who's ably assisted by Michaela Groom. And I wanted to make a quick announcement or a quick note on our club itself. Last Monday night we held our AGM, and I'm really pleased to announce the committee for the next 12 months, which includes myself staying on as president, Mark Neville as vice president, Will Banks as secretary, Rolly Wilson as treasurer, and our committee members Mark Phelps, Wendy Browns-Comer, Carolyn Martin, Michael Blakeney and Fran Becker. Also a big thanks to our outgoing committee member Kelly Buchanan, who's left us due to new work commitments with the ABC. She's going to be very, very busy lady. So Kelly is always energetic, and her involvement in our club has proven to be a real treasure chest of ideas and enthusiasm and a voice from regional Queensland. So Kelly will be missed, but we wish her all the best in her future career endeavours and her recent appointment as president of the Australian Council of Agricultural Journalists. So again, congratulations to the committee, and thank you for all of your support from my own personal perspective over the last year and looking ahead to the next 12 months. And also many thanks to you, our audience, our valued community members, for logging into today's event. We're continually delighted by the support we receive from the ag sector, from agribusiness, from the media as well. And we truly do appreciate you continuing to be part of our events, despite the logistical challenges that we currently face, and we just can't wait to be back seeing you in person. Please keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation to our next RPC online event. We're locking that in now, and we'll have that through to you shortly. But for now, we will let you get back to your day. And as we always say, we'll see you next time at the Rural Press Club. Thank you.